if I recall correctly, your actual area of expertise as an historian is the Civil War, right?
Well, not necessarily. Yeah, kind of. but I would say more from the 18th century to the early 20th century.
What I was getting at, though, is when it came to it, when you decided to move into fiction, that was not where you went. You went somewhere completely different. You know, why and where, what is the roots of the alternate world? It's interesting when listening to Myke and to John, three different kinds of military science fiction here. Myke's, your books are set what I would call more or less in the present, and John's, at least The Lost Fleet, the Jack Campbell books, are far distant in the future. What Taylor is doing is in the past. This is a the beginning of World War II. The destroyers are steam destroyers. The Walker, the destroyer of the title, the titular destroyer, is an actual ship, and they go through a time, one of those things that people go to into an alternate world. Those things, you know, they're all over the place. So it's interesting that three different authors have come at this sort of material in three different ways. But getting back to you, Taylor, why the destroyers? Why an alternate world that you had mentioned Edgar Rice Burroughs, that I think must come from some of your reading of Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Oh yeah. It's like you said, 6 years old. They're just absorbing that stuff. My daughter was the same way. She read Treasure Island and all that stuff that I wish that kids would read in school now. They have them reading, you know, your pet should be nice to each other books and stuff like that. And if they're not, scold them, you know, softly. But you know, back then they had real adventure stories with a real message. It was interesting, it was fun, and that's what I've always enjoyed myself. And what the genesis of the Destroyerman series is, as I mentioned earlier, I was down working on the 2003 Alamo movie with a number of people. I was down there 7.5 months, and we had several conversations during the course of that. You know, it's kind of common, I guess, when you're doing a movie about the Alamo to discuss Alamo-like situations in history. And, of course, the obvious ones, you know, Thermopylae, and not necessarily ones that everybody died, but you know, there were pretty dire circumstances, and you had, you know, Bastogne, Rorke's Drift, you know, on and on and on. And I had just popped off and said, well, what about the Asiatic fleet at the outbreak of World War II? And nobody knew what I was talking about. I said, well, I got to do something about that, but then I wanted to have fun with it. And bring these characters to life in that time period and see how they would respond to the bizarre situation they found themselves in. I've got dragon-like creatures, but I shoot at them with Thompsons. Yeah, fireballs or a 45 ACP, take your pick.
Thompson's 9mm ammo, no stopping power at all.
Who do you consider your audience? Who are you writing for? What are you writing for?
So this is the part where I'm terrified. Maybe more than normal. Because, and please don't jump all over me if I got this wrong, but my general understanding is that high fantasy tends to appeal largely to a sort of a female audience that doesn't read a lot of military science fiction, and that hard military stuff tends to largely appeal to, I keep thinking of the Bain crowd of David Weber and John Ringo and that kind of a thing. And so when I'm sort of dressing to both sides of the aisle, my hope is it's going to encompass everybody, right? And my fear is it's going to repel everybody. I think my audience is, at least for me, I think it's people who grew up with the old line of Terry Brooks and Tolkien and spellcasting and orcs and dwarves and dragons and all of that stuff, and will recognize that. And have now come of age in a post 9/11 world where, unfortunately, most of the people in the audience who've never served in the military know how a fire team works, because you see it on the news every day. And the whole world has become post-Westphalian now. I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience know what that term is, in that, the Cold War way of fighting has gone away. And there's a new military. And because of the internet, and because of social media, because of the constant and total and immediate exposure you get to how the military operates, that it's a military you'll be familiar with. And so that the audience will hopefully draw on those two touchstones and say, oh wow, I recognize this. Oh, and I recognize this. And that'll create the resonance. And if I pulled that off the way I hope I did, then the audience will be everybody. And that's at least the plan. And you guys are going to find out in about 5 months, and I haven't slept in one.
Now, from my discussions with Ann, I think, however, you did forget to put in the sparkly vampire.
Thank God.
I don't think
Can I admit something? Can I just say, nobody tell anybody? I got room for it. You have to all promise me you won't tell anybody.
You're being strange.
Facebook.
I don't like vampires. I don't like vampire stuff. I don't. I might, but I don't like vampires.
John, who are you writing for? What are you writing?
I hope I'm writing for anybody who likes a good story. Seriously, I try not to write in such a way that's going to exclude anyone. That anybody who picks up the book will be able to identify with the characters, figure out what the situation is, and enjoy where things take them. That said, I do hark back, I think, to an older, basically a clean writing style. I'm not trying to impress people with all the words I know or how confusing I can make things. I'm just telling a story and trying to get things across clearly. And one thing I do try to do is, as Myke said, there's a lot fewer people today, a lot smaller proportion of the population who served in the military. So I try to present an image of it which is very realistic, so that people can see this is it. This is not the comic book version. This is how people actually are. And I do that for the people who haven't been in, so they'll know what it's really like, the little hardships and the big hardships and the irritations and the good things and all that kind of stuff. And I also do that for the people who have been in, so they can say, hey, somebody understands. This is it. And they like that. So I'm writing for both groups in that respect to convey this image of how people are. And I also write, I think, because this was an old thing, but when I first started reading SF, and even in the comics mostly, except for the Legion of Superheroes, it was very hard to find good female characters. Anybody who didn't stand in the corner and go, eek, well, all the boys took care of everything. And I wanted to write books with good female characters, and people like, what's her name? The Avengers.
Emma Peel.
Emma Peel. Who, boy, in the 60s, groundbreaking, amazing. And I wanted to have stories about real women as well as real men, actual characters interacting with everything that happens good and bad. So I do try to write for everyone, and hopefully lots of people will enjoy that.
Taylor, no sparkly vampires in your work either, but there are. He didn't mention the one of the. You can't call them aliens, but one of the dominant species in the alternate world, speaking of Edgar Rice Burroughs, is called Lemurians. So we know what Taylor was reading when he was 6. Who and what do you write for, do you think?
I hopefully write for everybody. As I was writing along, I thought, well, hey, this is kind of fun. I think everybody will like it, As he was saying, there have evolved some very, very strong female characters in the series, not all of whom are human. The alternate universe that these very human, very rambunctiously male destroyermen wind up on has no women. And so they're, at first anyway, and there is what they refer to in the story in in the lexicon of the time as a very severe Dame famine underway. And that's I mean, which is as much a concern as the people that they're having to fight. But I didn't pick out any one group to write for. I think subconsciously or consciously to some degree, I was writing for people that like an old-fashioned adventure yarn with a twist. People that probably watched Gunsmoke when they were kids. You know, there is evil in the world, and it has to be confronted. And on Gunsmoke, everybody, you know, at the end of every episode, somebody died. Now, sometimes it was a good guy, but the bad guys were the bad guys. Now, it's not quite that cut and dried in my stories, but ultimately, the probably running along underneath everything else is that the people that you identify with most and root for most are doing the right thing as they see it, even when nobody's looking. And I think that that's important. And for that reason, I did specifically try to keep the series kind of PG-13. I mean, there's rough language. Don't get me wrong. It's for adults. There are you know, kind of crusty old Asiatic fleet destroyermen saying things, and sometimes they're frustrated and they say bad things. But there is a point beyond which I do not go, and I get an amazing amount of contacts from young adults, and that makes me very, very proud, very happy.
This may be close to my last question, and a possibly loaded question. Do any of you think that there's a particular political bias in your work? Are you intending it? Do you think it has happened without your intent? Or do you work very hard to not let any kind of bias show?
I want to answer that, but first, I got to tell you guys something. So this guy left early, and as he's walking out the door, he looks at me and makes eye contact. I just looked back and went.
He was afraid you were going to throw a fire.
I just looked back and I just went. It's a great moment. Sorry, I had to share that with you. Anyway, this was actually a tough question for me because I'm a serving officer, and the military is the bad guy in my book. And I love the military, and anyone who talks to me for 5 seconds will know that. It's a huge force in my life. I think it's an incredible force to good. But I'm not blind to the mistakes it makes. And I'm not blind to, out of necessity, how it can steamroll people. And that was tough for me. And if you didn't know me, and you didn't know where I came from, and you read this book, you're going to think I don't have a very positive, or you might think that I don't have a very positive view of the military and how it gets stuff done. Fortunately, in the second book, I get to redeem some of my antagonists, which is good. But I tried to steer, and look, my favorite authors, including Jack and Peter B. Brett and George R. R. Martin and Joe Abercrombie, all do this. And the thing that they do so well is they make characters complicated, right? I mean, even in comic books in the '60s, like Dr. Doom had a reason for what he did. Darth Vader, right? I mean, Darth Vader is a complicated guy, you know, and you find out more of it in the first 3 prequels, which were painful. But you do find out more what makes a Sith, you know. And Jaime Lannister, for those of you who read George R. R. Martin, you know, by the second, or is it the 3rd book they introduced this POV? 3rd book. I love Jaime Lannister. I want Jaime Lannister to succeed. This dude pushed a kid out a window, and I want him to be doing well. I think that the best writing does that, and it deals with the complexity. And the reality of it is I don't care if you're writing about Al-Qaeda, right? There's complexity to those people. There's complexity to why they do what they do. And when you paint something as evil, I mean, that's maybe easy, and in some ways, certainly there's a lot of temptation to do it in things like science fiction and fantasy. But I strive very, very hard not to, and hopefully I've been successful. So I guess that was a very long way of saying I hope you won't detect a political bias in my book.
I've actually had people tell me they can't tell from my books what my politics are. And my response is good. I'm not out to convert anybody to a specific point of view. What I do try to focus on is certain basic principles that I think everybody agrees on. Things like the main character here, he's rejoining a society that's been at war for 100 years. And they're doing a lot of things which were introduced because it was necessary to win. Well, they haven't won. And so he's asking the questions, if you're doing this terrible thing because it was necessary to win and you haven't won, why are you still doing it? So ask questions like that. He believes in honor, not in the sense of some sense of don't offend me, but in the sense of honor is a matter of how you treat other people. And so things like that form the basis of the book as opposed to any particular partisan political slant, because I think there are a great many things that at their core most people agree on. And my good guys are trying to follow those. And my bad guys, well, my bad guys are called the syndicate worlds. And they're basically corporations which have taken over full control of everything. So I was lucky in my choice of bad guys. Yes.
Occupy Dauntless.
Occupy. So they have all the faults of any organization which does not have any limits or controls on it. And I think that's something that everybody agrees on too. Everybody, everything needs some kind of control of what they do.
Well, obviously I strive to do the same thing that he does.
I'm making him go last.
Well, so I get to listen to what they say, and then
You could,
yeah.
or step.
You bet. No, everybody has some kind of a perspective. However, what I try to do is I try to introduce the characters in the historical perspective that they might have had. You know, there were different politics at the time in 1940, 1941, 42. Not everybody was a big supporter of Roosevelt. And of course, when I have Japanese characters that are good guys, and I have some that are bad guys. I have alien creatures, the Grick, some of whom are ravening, stupid bugs, basically, or reptiles. But then you start realizing, hey, they aren't all necessarily like that. And so, and they have their own politics. You know, I don't think, I hope I haven't introduced any modern day, political process into the story. I try to keep things from that time period, if that. Okay.
I also think
Otherwise, ditto.
I also think an interesting aspect of your work, that this thing that the destroyer goes through has been around for a long time, and as our main characters, it becomes a much bigger and much more complex because other humans, people from our world, have been going through it for ages. So there's a British Empire that has been formed by the descendants of the Elizabeths, the people that were going out to do the trading. And so they come into this world, and well, what do? They try to make it as familiar as possible, and that's one of the things I find interesting about it. As the series goes on and the destroyment encounter more and more of this, you realize that everybody tries in some way to turn this alternate world into something that they can be comfortable with, which in most instances have kept them from interfacing with the two species whose
Right.
world this really is. It's the men of the destroyer and women, there are a couple, who were the first people who have come through, who have actually gotten involved with the two dominant native species in any way. Everybody else has kind of gone off and set up their own world. And I find that very interesting. I'll brag on him more than he will. I think he does a really good job of it.
Well, one thing I would like to add to that is I actually got, from a political perspective, somebody accused me of being a neo-colonialist. I'm not sure exactly what that is. But the interesting thing is that the main characters in my story, when they come over, they're becoming more and more amalgamated with the indigenous people than the other way around. And so it's, that one really kind of,
That was wacky readers.
yeah.
Before
I was a huge supporter of FDR in the 40s.
Mike, you see, is an elf, which is why he spells his name with a Y.
And why?
Before I open the floor to questions, I'm